I showed up in Chicago completely unannounced, only to be met with the devastating discovery that my daughter was in the hospital, fighting for her life. All the while, her husband was living it up at a birthday party, immersed in a world of laughter and flowing champagne. Without a second thought, I stormed into that celebration and confronted him. "I have some terrible news for you," I said. He looked at me, confused, and asked, "What is it?" I simply replied, "You're going to find out in an hour." And when he did, his world completely unraveled. The key simply refused to turn in the lock. I applied more pressure, twisting it harder, feeling the unpleasant grating of metal against something that had no business being there. My fingers began to ache from how tightly I was gripping the cold brass, and beads of sweat formed on my forehead, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn air that drifted in through the open hallway window. Something was profoundly wrong. Eleanor had given me this key 3 years ago, insisting that I hold on to it for emergencies. I'd used it on a few occasions last Thanksgiving when she was stuck in traffic coming home from work, and that winter she came down with a terrible flu. It had never failed me before. I pulled the key out, holding it up to the unsteady, flickering light of the overhead fluorescent fixture. It was the same key, no doubt about it. The same familiar brass, the same smoothed down edges, where years of use had worn it down. I could even see the tiny scratch near its head, a memento from the time I'd accidentally dropped it in my garden toolbox. It was definitely my copy. I tried inserting it again, this time with deliberate slowness. The key slid into the lock, but stopped abruptly, hitting a solid obstruction long before it was fully seated. The lock had been changed. "Ellie?" My voice seemed to echo in the desolate corridor. I knocked, my knuckles rapping softly against the wood at first, then, with increasing force. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm here for my visit." There was only silence. Not a single sound, not the gentle shuffle of feet, or the familiar creak of the old floorboards. I pressed my ear flat against the cold surface of the door, trying to hear past the frantic pounding of my own heart. From the neighboring apartments, I could hear the muffled sounds of life, a television sitcom, indistinct conversations, and a small dog barking on a lower floor. But from apartment 4A, Eleanor's apartment, there was nothing but an unnerving stillness. I found the doorbell and jabbed it 3 times, the shrill, electronic chime reverberating from within the apartment. Still, no response. My phone felt like a lead weight in my coat pocket. The short flight from my home in the Illinois suburbs had left me feeling more exhausted than it should have. There had been too many delays at the airport, too much bitter coffee, and far too many anxious thoughts swirling in my head about why Eleanor hadn't answered my calls all week. Now, her voicemail picked up on the first ring. "Hi, you've reached Eleanor Vance. I can't come to the phone right now, but please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." That bright, cheerful voice, so reminiscent of her father's. "Ellie, honey, it's Mom. I'm standing outside your door, but my key isn't working. Did you change the locks? Please call me back, sweetheart. I'm starting to get really worried." Next, I tried Richard. His phone went to a generic, impersonal voicemail after a single ring. "You've reached Richard Sterling. Leave your name and number." "Richard, this is Clara. I'm at the apartment and I can't get in. Where is Ellie? Call me back the second you get this." The hallway seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in. The air was thick with the smells of other people's lives, garlic and fried onions wafting from under a neighbor's door. A burst of canned laughter from the television in apartment 4C felt jarringly out of place, a sound of normal Friday afternoon life that clashed violently with the panic blooming in my chest. I walked to the window at the end of the hall and looked down at the bustling Chicago street I had traveled 2 hours to see. Cars crawled along in the heavy afternoon traffic. People hurried down the sidewalks below, their arms full of grocery bags and briefcases, all living their ordinary lives while mine was beginning to feel like it was tilting off its axis. This wasn't like Eleanor. She always answered my calls. She always called back within the hour, no matter what. Even when she was swamped with work or having a disagreement with Richard, she always made time for her old mom. That was just who she was: responsible, thoughtful. She got that from her father. I dialed Ellie's number one more time. The same bright greeting. The same electronic tone. Sweetheart, it's me again. Something's wrong with the lock. I'm getting seriously concerned now. Please, please call me. Maybe I should have called before I came, instead of trying to surprise her. But she had always adored surprises, ever since she was a little girl. I remembered the time I drove 7 hours to her university, just to take her out for her birthday dinner. She had cried tears of joy right there in the middle of the crowded restaurant. No, this felt different. This felt terribly wrong. I leaned my back against her door. The solid wood, a stark contrast to the trembling in my legs. My overnight bag suddenly felt impossibly heavy, its strap digging into muscles already sore and tired from the trip. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed and flickered, throwing long, dancing shadows across the worn hallway carpet. I tried Richard's phone again. This time, it went straight to voicemail without even ringing. That automated voice telling me to leave a name and number. He had turned his phone off. Why would anyone change their locks and not tell their family? Why wouldn't Eleanor answer her phone for a whole week? Why would Richard turn his phone off when I was so desperately trying to reach them? The questions spun in my mind like relentless vultures, each one conjuring a more terrifying possibility than the last. An accident, a sudden illness, some terrible problem they were trying to handle by themselves. Problems they should have told me about. I tried Ellie's number one last time. The subscriber you are calling is not available. It wasn't her voicemail this time. It was a sterile, recorded message from the phone company. Her phone was off too. Just then, footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Someone was climbing the concrete steps, a set of keys jingling with each footfall. Maybe it was the building superintendent, someone who could tell me what happened with the lock. Or maybe, just maybe, it was Ellie, finally coming home to explain everything. I turned towards the sound, a tangled knot of hope and dread tightening in my stomach as the footsteps drew nearer. A man appeared at the top of the stairs, looking slightly winded. He was carrying a black trash bag in one hand and his keys in the other. He was probably in his late 50s, dressed in faded jeans and a well-worn Cubs t-shirt. He paused when he saw me standing by Eleanor's door, his eyebrows arching in mild curiosity. "You looking for someone?" he asked, shifting the garbage bag to his other hand. "My daughter, Eleanor Vance. She lives here," I said, gesturing toward apartment 4A. "I'm her mother, Clara Wallace." "Your daughter?" He set the trash bag on the floor and looked at me with open confusion. I didn't know she had family visiting. "She doesn't know I'm here," I explained, the words feeling empty and foolish now. "It was meant to be a surprise. But I can't get in. It looks like the lock has been changed." "I'm Mr. Peterson, from 4B, he said, pointing to the adjacent door. He scratched his jaw, his eyes studying me with the kind of careful appraisal that comes from years of observing the world. "Changed, you say? When was the last time you spoke with your daughter?" 2 weeks ago. Maybe a little more," I admitted, the confession stinging. "I've been calling and calling, but she's not picking up. Her husband isn't either." Mr. Peterson paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Haven't seen her around here for, must be 2 weeks now, maybe even longer." My stomach plummeted. "What do you mean? You haven't seen her?" "Just what I said. I used to see her coming and going nearly every day. Off to work, carrying groceries, that sort of thing. A very pleasant young woman. Always stopped to say hello. But lately," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Nothing." "But Richard's been here, right? Her husband?" His expression clouded over, becoming guarded and uncomfortable. He bent down and picked up his trash bag, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, yeah. I see him plenty." "Good," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "Then maybe he can tell me what's going on. Been with a different woman every few days, though." The word struck me like a physical blow. "What? Your son-in-law, Richard?" Mr. Peterson looked me straight in the eye now, his voice softening with pity. "He's been bringing other women around. Young women. Very glamorous looking. I just figured maybe your daughter had moved out and he was, well, you know." I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall for support. There has to be a mistake. I wish there was, he said, shifting his weight uncomfortably. Look, I'm not one to gossip, but I've lived in this building for 10 years. I know what I see. And what is it exactly that you've been seeing? I asked, my voice trembling. Last Tuesday night, it was a blonde in one of those fancy fur coats. Wednesday, a redhead wearing a dress that was far too short for this weather, if you ask me. And just yesterday, some brunette dripping in so much jewelry, it could light up the whole block. My hands curled into tight fists at my sides. Are you absolutely certain it was Richard? Same man, same key to this apartment. I hear them laughing loudly in the hallway, music playing at all hours. It wasn't like that when your daughter was here. She was always quiet, so respectful. The hallway began to tilt and spin around me. I pressed my palm against the cool plaster of the wall to steady myself. How long has this been happening? About 2, maybe 3 weeks. Right around the same time I stopped seeing Ellie. Mr. Peterson's voice was heavy with the burden of the news he was delivering. I kept telling myself it was none of my business. But if you're her mother, I need to find her, I whispered. Do you have any idea where she could have gone? He shook his head slowly. My mind was reeling, struggling to absorb the horrific picture he had just painted. Richard, my son-in-law for the past 5 years, was bringing other women, multiple, different women into Eleanor's apartment, while my daughter was, where? Look, Mr. Hand, Peterson said, hoisting his garbage bag again. I need to get this downstairs before the truck comes. But if you need anything at all, another pair of eyes, someone to ask around the neighborhood, I'm almost always home. Thank you, I managed to say, my own voice sounding faint and distant. He started down the stairs, then paused. Your daughter, she always seemed so happy when I saw her, always smiling, talking about her job. Whatever's happened, it wasn't because she was unhappy living here. His footsteps faded away down the stairwell, leaving me utterly alone with this crushing new reality. Richard wasn't just unavailable. He was actively betraying my daughter. But that still didn't answer the most terrifying question. Where was Eleanor? If she had left him, she would have called me. She would have packed her things, changed her number properly, offered some kind of explanation. Unless she couldn't. I stared at the door to apartment 4A. But I saw it differently now. It wasn't just a changed lock. It was a barricade. A barrier erected to keep me out. To keep me from discovering the truth of what had happened to my little girl. My phone felt like a useless brick in my pocket. Richard's number, Eleanor's number, neither was going to help me now. But there had to be another way to find her. A way that didn't rely on the honesty or cooperation of her deceitful husband. Think, Clara, I told myself. What tools do you have that he can't control? My legs felt unsteady as I followed Mr. Peterson's path down the stairs. The concrete steps seemed steeper than before, the cold metal railing slick beneath my palm. I needed to get outside, to find some air and space to think, to get away from that door, and the terrible story it was beginning to tell. Outside, the afternoon had grown chilly. A thick, overcast sky, pressed down on the Chicago street, a perfect mirror of my own dark mood. I found a small concrete bench near the building's entrance and collapsed onto it, my overnight bag landing on the pavement with a heavy thud. Different women every few days. The phrase echoed in my head, a cruel counterpoint to the fact that Eleanor was gone, missing, vanished without a single word or explanation. I pulled out my phone again, squinting at the bright screen. It was one of these new smartphones. Eleanor had insisted I upgrade from my ancient flip phone the last time she'd visited me in the suburbs. Mom, what if something happens to one of us? What if we need to find each other? She had argued. I'd resisted, telling her, I don't need to track you like some kind of fugitive. Honey, it's not about tracking, she'd said gently. It's about safety. Just let me download this one app. Find my family. Please? She'd given me that look. The same one she'd used to convince me to let her get a kitten when she was 10. As always, I'd caved. I watched as she tapped and swiped through a maze of settings I couldn't comprehend, entering passwords and granting permissions. She showed me how to use it once, but that was at least 6 months ago. Now, As I tried to remember which of the dozens of little icons was the right one, I felt every one of my 62 years. I dug through my bag, pushing aside a change of clothes and a bottle of aspirin until I found my reading glasses. The world snapped into focus, revealing rows of app icons I'd completely forgotten about. Games Eleanor had installed for when I was bored, news apps, a weather app, the camera. Where was it? Find my family. Was the icon blue or green? They all looked so similar. Then I saw it. A small icon with two stylized figures and a location pin. I tapped it, my finger feeling clumsy and thick on the smooth glass screen. A loading circle spun for what felt like an eternity. Come on! Come on! Password required. I tried my birthday, then Eleanor's birthday, then my late husband's middle name. Invalid. 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 What on earth had I used? Think, Clara, think. Of course. My birthday, followed by the year she graduated from college. She'd made me write it down on a piece of paper I'd long since lost. The phone accepted it. Suddenly, a map filled the screen. Red dots began to appear, one by one. My own location showed up as a pulsing blue circle right where I was sitting. Another red dot materialized farther north, deep in the heart of the city. That had to be Eleanor. But it wasn't at her apartment building. The red dot was positioned firmly in downtown Chicago, amidst a cluster of massive buildings I didn't recognize. I tapped on it, and a line of text appeared. Eleanor's iPhone, Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Hospital. The phone nearly slipped through my trembling fingers. I gripped it tighter, staring at those two words until they felt like they were burned into my retinas. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My daughter was in a hospital, and I had no idea why. I didn't know how long she had been there. I didn't even know if she was. I stood up so abruptly that my overnight bag toppled over onto the sidewalk. A hospital. It explained everything: the unanswered calls, her absence from the apartment, maybe even why Richard had changed the locks. But it explained nothing about the women Mr. Peterson had seen. Unless Richard assumed I would never find out. Unless he was using Eleanor's illness, and it had to be an illness, what else could keep her in a hospital for weeks, as an opportunity to? My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I bent down to retrieve my bag. The bustling street seemed to roar around me now, the blare of car horns and the wail of distant sirens blending into a chaotic urban symphony that perfectly matched the turmoil in my head. I had to get to her. I had to see for myself what was happening to my daughter. A yellow taxi crawled past in the gridlocked traffic. I stepped off the curb, waving my arm with frantic energy. It kept going. Another one passed, its occupied light glowing. A third didn't even seem to notice me. Please, I whispered to no one, stepping farther into the street. Please, just stop. Finally, a cab screeched to a halt beside me. The driver, a woman who looked to be in her 40s with weary but kind eyes, rolled down her window. Where to? Northwestern Memorial Hospital, I said, climbing into the back seat, the scent of worn leather and pine air freshener filling my nostrils. Please, hurry. It's an emergency, my daughter. The words came out choked and strangled. I think I need to see my daughter. She just nodded and expertly pulled back into the relentless flow of traffic. Through the window, the city blurred into a watercolor of brick buildings and storefronts, a backdrop for people living out their normal Friday afternoons, while my entire world was cracking apart. The app was still open on my phone, that single red dot, holding steady and unmoving at the hospital. How long had Eleanor been there? What could possibly be wrong with her that would require weeks of hospitalization? And the most agonizing question of all, why hadn't anyone told me? Unless Richard had informed the hospital that he would be the one to handle all family notifications, unless he had deliberately and cruelly kept me in the dark while he brought other women into her home, using her absence for his own selfish purposes. The taxi shot through a yellow light, carrying me closer to answers I was becoming increasingly terrified to hear. The traffic on Lakeshore Drive moved at a glacial pace. I sat rigidly in the back seat of the taxi, clutching my phone so hard my knuckles had turned white. The red dot on the screen remained stubbornly fixed. Eleanor was still at Northwestern, still inside that sprawling medical complex, still needing me while I was trapped in this Friday afternoon gridlock. Big accident up ahead, the driver explained, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. She was about 45, with a kind face etched with worry lines that told me she'd chauffeured her share of frantic passengers. I can try taking the side streets. Might be a little faster. Whatever gets me there the quickest, I replied. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The name echoed in my mind, a broken mantra of fear and confusion. Why was my daughter in a hospital? How long had she been a patient? The tracking app could show me her location, but it couldn't tell me if she was there visiting a friend, having some routine tests. Or no, I refused to let my mind go there. Eleanor was young. She was healthy. She ran along the lakefront, ate kale salads, and took all those vitamin supplements her father used to gently tease her about. She couldn't be seriously ill. But Mr. Peterson's words haunted me. Haven't seen her around here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks in a hospital was not a routine anything. I tried calling her again. The same robotic message, subscriber not available. Her phone was either out of battery or switched off. Richard's number, once again, went directly to voicemail. The man was actively avoiding me. My own phone's battery had dipped to 23%. I'd been compulsively checking the map, watching our agonizingly slow progress across the city. At this rate, it would be another 20 minutes before we arrived. The taxi lurched through an intersection, only to stop again in a sea of red brake lights. An ambulance, sirens screaming, sped past us, its flashing red and blue lights washing the inside of the cab in urgent, strobing colors. My chest constricted as I watched it disappear in the direction of the medical district, the same district where my daughter was waiting. 4 years ago, I had made a similar desperate journey. A different hospital, a different city, but the same suffocating fear lodged in my chest. Michael had been in stage 4 when they finally gave us the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, the oncologist had said, with that well-practiced, detached sympathy they learn in medical school. We had caught it far too late. I had held his hand through grueling chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, and finally, the quiet stillness of hospice care. I had promised him, in those final days, that I would always take care of Eleanor, that I would protect our daughter from the kind of pain we were enduring. Now, here I was, trapped in traffic, terrified that I was failing to keep that promise. Family emergency? The driver asked gently. My daughter, I said, my voice hoarse. She's in the hospital, and I didn't even know. These things can happen so fast sometimes, she said, accelerating through a yellow light and gaining us a few precious feet. My own brother was diagnosed with a heart condition last year. Nobody had a clue until he collapsed at his office. Sometimes, people try to hide things because they want to protect the ones they love. That sounded exactly like Eleanor. She'd hidden her financial struggles in college until she was months behind on her rent. She'd hidden her early doubts about Richard until long after they were married. She always tried to carry every burden herself, just like her father. The Chicago skyline shifted around us as the driver expertly navigated a series of side streets. Soon, the landscape began to change. Medical buildings appeared with increasing frequency, urgent care clinics, specialists' offices, and large chain pharmacies. We were getting close. My phone rang, and I fumbled with it, my heart leaping into my throat. An unknown number. Hello? Ellie? Wrong number, sorry, a man's voice replied. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the worn vinyl of the seat. Every notification, every ring, sent a jolt of hope and terror through me in equal measure. She's going to be okay, the driver said, with a firm, reassuring tone. Whatever is wrong, having her family there will make all the difference. You're doing the right thing. Through the window, I could see the massive, modern complex of Northwestern Memorial Hospital looming ahead. Towers of glass filled with countless windows, each one looking down on thousands of private tragedies and quiet miracles every single day. Somewhere inside that labyrinth of rooms and hallways, my daughter was waiting, completely unaware that I was on my way. The taxi pulled up to the main entrance, joining a queue of cars dropping off patients and visitors. People streamed in and out of the sliding glass doors, some moving with urgency, others walking with a slow, pained gait, all of them carrying their own invisible burdens of worry and hope. "That'll be $32.50, the driver said. I handed her two $20 bills, but she shook her head. "Keep the change, ma'am. Go find your daughter." I grabbed my bag and stepped out onto the sidewalk, my neck craning as I looked up at the imposing medical center. My phone read 3:40 p.m. Wherever Eleanor was in that building, I was about to find out why she had been hiding from me for 2 weeks. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, pulling me into whatever truth was waiting inside. The hospital lobby was an immediate assault on the senses. The polished marble floors echoed with every footstep. The air had the sharp, antiseptic bite of disinfectant, and the stark fluorescent lighting seemed to make everyone look pale and unwell. A long bank of information desks stretched across the far wall, manned by staff in scrubs who looked as though they had been fielding worried questions since dawn. I walked toward the nearest desk, my overnight bag feeling heavier with each step. "I'm looking for my daughter, Eleanor Vance. I believe she's a patient here." The woman behind the counter, who looked to be in her 30s with exhausted eyes, began typing on her computer. "Are you on her emergency contact list, ma'am?" "I'm her mother, Clara Wallace." More typing. A long pause. Then, her expression softened into something that looked like relief. "Room 314, on the 3rd floor. You can take the elevators to your right. I'll call up and let the nurses know you're on your way." Room 314, 3rd floor. The numbers felt like a lead weight in my mind as I walked towards the elevators. Other visitors waited with me in silence. A young man clutching a bouquet of wilting roses, an elderly woman leaning heavily on a walker, a young couple holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. The elevator ascended with excruciating slowness, the floor numbers lighting up one by one. 2nd floor, general medicine. 3rd floor, my destination. The doors opened with a soft chime. This floor felt different from the chaotic lobby below. It was quieter, more somber. A sign on the wall read, "Oncology Unit," with an arrow pointing down a long corridor lined with identical doors. Oncology. Cancer. My legs buckled beneath me. I reached out and grabbed the wall to keep from collapsing, my overnight bag sliding from my grasp and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Cancer. That's why Eleanor was here. That's why she hadn't been answering my calls. And that's why Richard had been bringing other women to her apartment while she was in this sterile hallway, fighting for her life. "Ma'am, are you all right?" A woman in a white coat had materialized at my side. She was in her mid-40s, with a kind face and intelligent eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses. Her name badge read, "Dr. Evans, Oncology." I'm looking for my daughter, Eleanor Vance, room 314. "You must be Mrs. Wallace." Her voice was gentle, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. "I'm Dr. Evans, Eleanor's oncologist. I was hoping we could speak privately for a moment." She led me to a small, sterile consultation room just down the hall. It was furnished with plain, uncomfortable chairs, a box of tissues on the table, and framed medical diplomas on the walls. It was the kind of room designed for conversations no one ever wants to have. "How much do you know about your daughter's condition?" Dr. Evans asked as we sat down. "Nothing," I whispered, the word feeling like a terrible confession. "I just found out she was in the hospital an hour ago." "What's wrong with her?" Dr. Evans opened a medical file, her movements slow and deliberate. "Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 weeks ago. It's stage 4, which means it has already metastasized to other organs. She's been hospitalized for the past 2 weeks for pain management and palliative care." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The same disease that had taken Michael from me. The exact same words I had heard 4 years ago, delivered with the same professional, practiced compassion. "That can't be right," I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. "She's only 32. She's so healthy. She runs, she eats well." Cancer doesn't discriminate based on age or lifestyle, Mrs. Wallace. I am so sorry. What's the prognosis? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I had to hear it. With aggressive treatment, we may be able to extend her life by several months. Without treatment, she paused, choosing her words with care. Weeks to months, depending on how she responds to the pain management. The room was spinning violently now. I gripped the arms of the chair, trying to anchor myself to reality. Why wasn't I called? I'm her mother. I should have been notified immediately. The emergency contact information we have on file is for her husband, Richard Sterling, Dr. Evans explained. We have made multiple attempts to contact him, but we have not received a response. Of course. Richard knew. Richard had known for 6 long weeks that his wife was dying, and instead of calling her family, instead of being by her side to support her, he had been parading a string of women through her home, as if she were already gone. Where is he now? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. I can't discuss the personal information of other family members, but I can tell you that Eleanor has been essentially alone throughout this entire ordeal. The nursing staff has been very concerned about her lack of family support. Alone. My daughter had been facing the same horrific disease that had killed her father, in the same kind of cold, sterile hospital room, and she had been doing it all by herself. Because her husband was a monster, and her mother was too trusting to realize something was terribly wrong. Can I see her? Of course. But Mrs. Wallace, Dr. Evans leaned forward, her expression full of compassion. The physical changes can be startling. The cancer has progressed very quickly, and the treatments, even the palliative ones, take a significant toll. She's much thinner than she was 6 weeks ago, and she becomes exhausted very easily. I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. Michael had gone through the same cruel transformation. My vibrant, handsome husband had gradually faded away before my eyes, until only his spirit remained, fierce and loving to the very end. She doesn't know you're coming, does she? No. This was supposed to be a surprise visit. Dr. Evans stood, closing the medical file. She has been asking about you, wondering why you haven't called. The guilt was a physical blow. She made me promise not to contact you. She said she didn't want you to worry, not after losing your husband to the same illness. While I had been living my quiet life in the suburbs, tending my garden, reading books, and watching old movies, my daughter had been trying to protect me from the truth, even as she was fighting for her own life. Room 314 is just down the hall. Dr. Evans said softly, "Would you like me to come with you?" Dr. Evans knocked gently on the door to room 314. "Eleanor, you have a visitor." "I'm not really up for visitors today," a voice from inside replied. It was weaker than I remembered, fragile, but it was unmistakably my daughter's. "I think you'll want to see this one," the doctor said, pushing the door open slightly. "Your mother is here." There was a moment of silence, then a sharp, audible gasp. I stepped into the room, and the sight of her nearly shattered me. Eleanor was propped up in the hospital bed. Her once vibrant face was now gaunt and pale, and her beautiful dark hair, which she had always been so proud of, was thin and brittle from the treatments. IV lines snaked from her arms to a bank of machines that beeped and whirred softly in the background. But her eyes, her father's eyes, were still bright, still sharp and alert. "Mom?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. What are you doing here?" "Surprising my daughter," I managed to say, though my voice was no steadier than hers. That was the plan, anyway. She tried to push herself up straighter, wincing with the effort. "You can't be here. I mean, it's so wonderful that you're here, but you weren't supposed to find out about this. Not like this." I set my bag on the floor and walked to her bedside. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, making the medical equipment seem slightly less menacing, but it couldn't disguise how frail and small she looked against the stark white sheets. "Dr. Evans tells me you've been here for 2 weeks. It's not as bad as it looks," she said quickly, using the same tone she had as a child when trying to convince me a scraped knee didn't really hurt. "They're just managing my pain, making sure I'm comfortable." I reached out and gently touched her cheek. Her skin felt as thin as paper, and it was warm with fever or medication. Sweetheart, why didn't you tell me? Tears welled in her eyes. Because I watched what Dad's cancer did to you. I saw how it destroyed you to watch him suffer. I couldn't put you through that all over again. That wasn't your decision to make, I said, pulling the visitor's chair closer to her bed and sinking into it. I'm your mother. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. But you just lost Dad 4 years ago. You're finally starting to seem like yourself again. I didn't want to be the one to take that away from you. I took her hand, being careful to avoid the IV port taped to her skin. I lost your father, yes, but you are my daughter. You are all I have left of him, of the life we built together. Did you honestly think I would want to spend whatever time we have left apart from each other? She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly weak. I was scared you would try to take over, make all the decisions, turn this into some kind of battle, like you did with Dad. The words stung, because they were true. I had fought Michael's cancer as if it were an enemy I could defeat through sheer force of will. I had dragged him from one specialist to another, pushed for experimental treatments, and refused to accept the inevitable until the very end. I learned some things from that experience, I said quietly. This is your fight, Ellie. These are your choices. I am only here to support you in whatever you decide. Really? She searched my face, looking for the stubborn woman who had once argued with oncologists and demanded second, third, and fourth opinions. Really? But I am going to ask one question, and I need you to give me an honest answer. She nodded. Where is your husband? Her expression shifted, a flicker of pain crossing her face that had nothing to do with the cancer. Richard. He's having a very hard time with all of this. What does that mean? When we got the diagnosis, he said he needed some space to process it. He's been staying with his brother out in Evanston. She looked away from me, her gaze fixing on the 4 bag hanging by her bed. He says he'll come back when he's ready to handle it. Ready to handle watching his wife die. Ready to handle being a husband when things got difficult. My hands clenched into fists in my lap. How long has it been since you've seen him? 2 weeks. Since I was admitted. Her voice grew smaller, almost a whisper. He calls sometimes, asks how I'm doing, tells me about how stressed he is at work, but he hasn't visited. I thought of what Mr. Peterson had told me. Different women every few days, laughing in the hallway, music playing late, while my daughter lay alone in this hospital bed, clinging to the belief that her husband was grieving at his brother's house. Richard was using her apartment as his personal playground. Mom, you have that look. What look? The same one you got when Dad's insurance company tried to deny his coverage. Like you're planning something. I forced my expression to soften. I'm just thinking about logistics. How long do the doctors think you'll need to be here? Probably another week or 2. It depends on how well they can get the pain under control with oral medications. And after that, you can't go back to that apartment by yourself. I'll be fine. Richard says he'll be ready to come back by then. I highly doubted that. Richard had revealed his true character the moment his wife needed him most. But I couldn't tell Eleanor about the women, not now. Not while she was fighting for her life, and not while she was still holding on to the fragile hope that her marriage meant something. What if you came home with me? The suburbs aren't that far. You could have your old room back. I could take proper care of you. She offered a sad smile. Mom, your house has stairs up to every bedroom, and the closest hospital is 40 minutes away. I need to be close to my medical team. A nurse appeared in the doorway, glancing at her watch. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to do some blood work and adjust her medications. Could you give us about 30 minutes? I looked at Eleanor, hesitant to leave her alone again, even for a moment. Go get some coffee, she said. There's a decent cafeteria on the first floor. Come back in an hour, and we can figure out where you're going to stay and how long you can visit. I stood up slowly, my back aching from the emotional toll of the past few hours. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I'm staying in the city for as long as you need me. Promise? Promise. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. Your old mom isn't going to run away just because things get tough. As I picked up my bag and headed for the door, I was already making a different set of promises to myself. promises that concerned Richard Sterling, and what happens to men who abandon their wives when life gets hard. The medical team filed into Eleanor's room with a practiced efficiency, wheeling in equipment I didn't recognize. Dr. Evans gave me a look that was both gentle and firm, the kind that clearly communicated that family members needed to step aside and let the professionals do their work. "We'll need about an hour for these procedures," she explained in a low voice. "There's a family waiting area just down the hall, or you could grab a coffee in the cafeteria." I nodded and picked up my bag, but every fiber of my being protested, leaving Eleanor alone. She had been abandoned by the one person who had vowed to stand by her in sickness and in health. I would not add to that feeling of betrayal, not even for an hour. "I'll be right outside," I told her as the door closed. Walking down the oncology ward corridor, I pulled out my phone and dialed Richard's number again. Straight to voicemail, just as it had the last 4 times. This time, I left a very different kind of message. "Richard, this is Clara. I'm at Northwestern Memorial with your wife. She's been in here for 2 weeks battling cancer while well, I know exactly where you've been. Call me back." 20 seconds later, I tried again, this time using one of the hospital's landlines, on the off chance he had blocked my number. It rang once before cutting to voicemail. He was screening his calls. My hands were no longer shaking. The initial paralyzing shock of Eleanor's diagnosis had hardened into something colder and far more focused. 40 years as an architect had taught me to approach every problem systematically. Richard Sterling had just become a problem that required a solution. I scrolled through my contacts until I found David Chen's number. He was an old friend of my late husband's who had gone into private investigation after retiring from the police force. I hadn't spoken to David in months, but some friendships are built to withstand long periods of silence. "Clara, this is a surprise. How are you holding up?" "Not well, David. I need a favor, and I need it handled quietly." There was a brief pause on the line. David had always been exceptionally good at reading between the lines. "What kind of favor?" "Information gathering. I'll pay your standard rate. You know money is never an issue between us." "What's going on?" I explained everything. Eleanor's diagnosis, Richard's abandonment, the changed locks, and the neighbor's disturbing account of other women. David listened patiently, without a single interruption. It was one of the many things I had always admired about him. "Where is he right now?" David asked, when I had finished. "That's what I need you to find out. And I need to know as soon as possible. I can make some calls, run a few traces. Give me an hour." "Thanks, David." And David, this stays strictly between us for now. After hanging up, I found the family waiting area. I was surrounded by other people in the throes of their own medical crises, but there was a stark difference. They had support systems, spouses holding hands, adult children taking turns at bedsides, friends arriving with coffee and magazines. My Ellie had me, finally, and a husband who couldn't even be bothered to answer his phone. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Happy birthday to me. The Signature Lounge is incredible." It was probably a wrong number, but something about it nagged at me. I opened the Instagram app Eleanor had set up on my phone months ago. Another piece of technology I had initially resisted. Social media had always felt so invasive, but right now, it might prove to be useful. Richard's profile was in her list of followers. His latest stories had been posted just 30 minutes ago. The images were a gut punch. Champagne glasses clinking together. A breathtaking rooftop view of the Chicago skyline. A group of people laughing around a table decorated with balloons. The location tag read, "The Signature Lounge at the 96th. A birthday celebration." While his wife was undergoing cancer treatments, Richard was throwing a party for himself. I took a screenshot of everything. My architect's mind automatically began documenting the evidence. The timestamps, the locations, the faces of the people who were clearly not mourning anyone's illness. There were young women in slinky cocktail dresses, men in expensive-looking suits, everyone beaming as if they were having the time of their lives. David called back much sooner than I had expected. "Found him? Your son-in-law's credit card has been very active at the Signature Lounge, starting at 4:00 p.m. It's a high-end rooftop bar downtown. Very expensive place. He's already spent over $3,000 tonight. $3,000. While Eleanor was probably worried about insurance copays and the cost of her prescriptions. Clara, what are you planning? David's voice was laced with concern. Because you have that tone in your voice that Michael used to worry about. The one that meant you were about to do something you couldn't take back. Michael, he would have known exactly what I was thinking right now. He also would have tried to talk me out of it. And then, when he realized my mind was made up, he would have helped me plan it down to the last detail. I'm going to have a conversation with Richard. In public. At his party. That could get messy, Clara. Very fast. Good. Messy means there will be witnesses. Messy means there will be consequences. Clara. He abandoned his dying wife to throw himself a birthday party. He's with other women. Spending money that should be going toward her medical bills. What kind of conversation do you think he deserves? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The kind where you might need backup just in case. I can be there in 30 minutes. No. This needs to be between me and him. But thank you. Then at least promise me you won't do anything that will get you arrested. Eleanor needs her mother, not her mother's lawyer. He was right about that. Whatever I did had to be precise, controlled. This had to be about justice, not revenge. Though the line between the two was becoming increasingly blurred. I checked the time. 6:30 p.m. The medical procedures would be finished by 7:30. That gave me enough time for a quick trip downtown and back. The Signature Lounge was a 20-minute subway ride from the hospital. As I stood up from the waiting room chair, I felt different than I had an hour ago. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest. So was the fear for my daughter's future, and the white-hot anger at the sheer unfairness of it all. But beneath those swirling emotions, something harder and more useful had taken root: purpose. Richard thought he could just walk away from his responsibilities while his wife fought for her life. He was about to learn that he was profoundly mistaken. The subway ride downtown gave me more time to delve into Richard's social media footprint. Each new post painted an even clearer picture of a betrayal that went far beyond mere neglect. This wasn't a man struggling to cope with his wife's illness. This was a man celebrating his newfound freedom from it. His Instagram stories created a timeline of calculated cruelty. At 4:00 p.m., around the same time Dr. Evans had been explaining Eleanor's prognosis to me. Richard was posing for a photo with a magnum of champagne. At 5:30, while I was holding my daughter's thin, frail hand, he was being photographed with his arm draped around a blonde woman who looked young enough to be his own daughter. But it was the videos that truly revealed the depth of his character. In one, filmed just an hour ago, Richard raised a glass to the camera and toasted. To freedom, to new beginnings, and to finally living my best life. The audio was crystal clear, his words sharp and unmistakable, his joy utterly genuine. All while his wife was fighting cancer, alone, in a hospital bed. I saved every single piece of evidence to my phone, my mind automatically organizing the files and noting the timestamps. If this ever became a legal matter, I wanted irrefutable documentation. But for now, I just wanted ammunition. My phone rang as the train pulled into a station in the loop. It was David again. I did a little more digging. Your son-in-law has been planning this party for 3 weeks. He reserved the venue, hired a professional photographer, and sent out invitations via social media. This wasn't a spontaneous celebration, Clara. This was premeditated. 3 weeks. That was right around the time Eleanor was admitted to the hospital. While she was being told that her cancer had spread, Richard was booking party venues. There's more, David continued. His credit card records show a clear pattern. Dinners at high-end restaurants, purchases at expensive clothing stores, jewelry that certainly wasn't intended for his wife. This has been going on since her diagnosis. 6 weeks of treating my daughter's terminal illness as his own personal liberation party. David, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer, I said. Shoot. If this were your daughter, what would you do? There was a long pause. Probably something that would deeply disappoint my better angels, but would bring immense satisfaction to my father's heart. which is precisely why I think you should wait. Think this through. I have thought it through. He's not just abandoning her, David. He is celebrating her death while she is still alive. And what's your plan? You're going to storm into his party and do what, exactly? I stepped out of the subway station and into the overwhelming chaos of downtown Chicago. Neon signs blazed all around me, casting a garish glow on the crowds of people heading to dinner reservations and Broadway shows. The city that never sleeps, filled with people living their lives while mine was falling apart. I'm going to give him some news, I said. Bad news. Clara. Thanks for your help, David. I'll call you later. I hung up before he could argue with me any further. This was no longer about reason. This was about justice. And sometimes, justice for private cruelties requires a very public embarrassment. The signature lounge was on the roof of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the city. Through the massive windows, I could see elegantly dressed people holding delicate glasses, celebrating whatever it is that wealthy people celebrate on a Friday night. The pulse of the music and the sound of laughter were audible even from the street below. The elevator to the roof required a key card, but the security guard at the desk was surprisingly helpful. Family emergency, I explained, showing him my driver's license. I need to speak with my son-in-law, Richard Sterling. There's been a medical crisis. The guard looked at my tired face, my simple, rumpled clothes, and my obvious distress, and he made a human decision. Rooftop level, ma'am. But please, try to be discreet. This is an upscale establishment. I'll do my best, I promised. The elevator ascended 30 floors. Through the glass walls, the city of Chicago spread out beneath me like a vast, glittering circuit board. Somewhere in that sprawling maze of buildings, my daughter was lying in a hospital bed, her only companions, the nurses, and the beeping machines. And somewhere above me, her husband was celebrating his freedom from her suffering. The elevator doors opened onto a rooftop paradise. The lounge certainly lived up to its name. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, while an outdoor deck provided fresh air and even more stunning vistas. Well-dressed patrons clustered around high-top tables. A DJ spun ambient music, and servers glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It took me less than 30 seconds to find him. Richard had put on some weight since the last family dinner. His face was fuller, more satisfied, and his expensive suit was perfectly tailored to his new, prosperous look. He was standing near the entrance to the outdoor deck, holding court with a small group of admirers, 3 young women and 2 men about his age, all of them hanging on his every word. As I watched, he threw his head back and let out a loud, booming laugh at something one of them had said. It was a laugh of pure, genuine enjoyment, the laugh of a man without a single care in the world. I started walking towards him, my steps steady and deliberate. The crowd seemed to part for me automatically. Perhaps it was my age, or the expression on my face, or maybe it was the way I moved with such singular focus through their casual celebration. People noticed me, and their gazes shifted towards Richard, sensing that something was about to happen. He finally saw me when I was about 10 feet away. The laughter died in his throat, the color drained from his face, and the champagne glass in his hand trembled. He glanced around frantically, as if searching for an escape route, but his friends had formed a semicircle around him, effectively trapping him against the railing of the deck. "Hello, Richard." My voice carried clearly over the thumping bass of the music. Several nearby conversations sputtered to a halt as people turned to watch the unfolding drama. "Clara? What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "Your wife told me you were having a difficult time processing her illness," I said, my voice loud enough for his friends to hear every word. "That you needed some space to handle the emotional burden of her cancer diagnosis." Imagine my surprise when I discovered that this is how you handle your emotional burdens. One of the young women looked at him in confusion. "Cancer? Richard, you never mentioned anything about—" It's complicated," Richard stammered, his eyes darting between me and his rapidly shrinking audience. "It's a family medical issue, very private, not something you talk about at a social event." "Private?" I took a step closer, and Richard actually flinched. backing up until he was pressed against the railing. Your wife has been in the hospital for 2 weeks, Richard. She has terminal stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She's been asking for you, wondering why you haven't visited. The second woman slowly put down her drink. The men exchanged uneasy glances. The festive party atmosphere around us had evaporated, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. While she has been undergoing painful treatments, fighting for every single day of her life, you've been here, spending thousands of dollars to celebrate your freedom. I have the pictures, Richard. The credit card receipts. The social media posts about your new beginning. You don't understand the situation. Oh, I understand it perfectly, I said, my voice calm and controlled, yet it cut through his pathetic protests like a surgeon's scalpel. You abandoned your dying wife to throw yourself a birthday party with other women, using money that should be paying for her medical care. The silence around us was now absolute. Even the DJ seemed to have lowered the music. Richard's friends were staring at him with expressions that ranged from utter disgust to sheer horror. I came here to give you some news, Richard. Bad news, I'm afraid. I paused for effect. In 1 hour, something very, very unpleasant is going to happen to you. I won't tell you what it is, but I can guarantee you will not enjoy it. What do you mean, Clara? What are you talking about? But I was already walking away. My message had been delivered. My purpose had been served. Behind me, I could hear Richard calling my name. I could hear his friends peppering him with questions he couldn't possibly answer, and I could hear the energy of his party collapsing into a cacophony of uncomfortable whispers. The elevator doors closed on Richard's panicked, ashen face, the ruins of his birthday celebration crumbling around him. 1 hour, I had told him. Now, the clock was ticking. The elevator descended through the glass tower, Manhattan sparkling outside like a blanket of scattered diamonds. I glanced at my watch. 8:45 p.m. The medical procedures at the hospital would be over by now, and Eleanor would be wondering where I had gone. But I had one more stop to make first. During the subway ride back to the hospital, my phone buzzed with a series of increasingly frantic calls from Richard. I ignored every one of them, letting each go to voicemail. Every unanswered ring was a small part of his punishment. The gnawing uncertainty, the rising fear, the dawning realization that his comfortable, selfish world was about to implode. By the time I arrived at Northwestern, Richard had left 6 voicemails. I stood in the hospital lobby and listened to them, his panic escalating with each message. Clara, please call me back. We need to talk about this misunderstanding. Look, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the full situation. Ellie agreed to this. This is harassment. You can't just threaten people and walk away. I'm calling the police. Clara, please. Whatever you're planning, we can work this out. I'll do whatever you want. I'm begging you. Please don't destroy my life over this. The rapid progression from blustering arrogance to pathetic desperation was exactly what I had hoped for. For 6 weeks, Richard had operated under the assumption that he could abandon his responsibilities without facing any consequences. Now, he was learning otherwise. Dr. Evans met me outside Eleanor's room. The procedures went well. Her pain should be much more manageable now. She's been asking for you. How is she? Tired. But the medications are helping. You can go in now, but try to keep the visit calm. She needs to rest. I entered room 314 to find Eleanor looking even smaller than before, if that was possible. The medical procedures had clearly taken their toll, but her eyes still held the fierce intelligence I remembered from her childhood. Where did you go? She asked, her voice weak. The nurse said you just stepped out, but you were gone for hours. I had a few errands to run. Nothing important. I lied easily. Protecting her from the sordid details of Richard's party would spare her unnecessary pain. Mom, I know you're angry about Richard not being here, but please don't do anything dramatic. I can't handle any family drama on top of everything else. If only she knew what real family drama looked like. But that was precisely why I had handled this the way I did. Eleanor deserved to focus all her energy on fighting cancer, not on mourning the wreckage of her marriage. My phone rang. Richard again. This time, I answered. Clara, thank God you picked up. Please, we need to meet. We need to discuss. The hour isn't up yet, Richard, I said, my voice calm and even. When it is, you'll know. What are you talking about? What's going to happen in an hour? Something you won't enjoy. I guarantee it. I hung up. Eleanor was watching me, her expression full of concern. Mom, what was that about? Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. Just some business I needed to take care of. Even as I said it, I was checking the time. 9:20 p.m. 40 minutes since I'd left the party. 20 minutes. Until Richard's deadline. My phone immediately rang again. This time, instead of answering, I turned it off completely. Richard could spend the next 20 minutes stewing in his own escalating panic, wondering what terrible fate was about to befall him. The uncertainty, I knew, would be far worse than any actual punishment I could inflict. You look different, Eleanor said quietly. Calmer, somehow. More like yourself. She was right. The helpless, suffocating grief I'd felt earlier had been transformed into something more productive. I had taken action, imposed a consequence, and restored some semblance of balance to a situation that had been grotesquely unfair. For the first time since I had arrived in Chicago, I felt like I was properly protecting my daughter. I'm just glad I'm here with you now. Will you stay tonight? I know they have cots for visitors. Of course, I'm not going anywhere. As we talked about her treatment options and the next steps, a part of my mind was tracking the remaining time. 15 minutes until Richard's deadline. By now, he had probably tried calling the hospital directly, maybe even attempted to come here himself. But I had already spoken with hospital security and explained the situation, and they had agreed to limit his access. The hospital's protocols for family emergencies gave me temporary authority over her visitors. At 9:50 p.m., I excused myself to use the restroom and turned my phone back on. 23 missed calls from Richard, and a dozen text messages that ranged from angry demands to desperate pleas. The final message, sent just 5 minutes ago, read, "Please, Clara, I'll do anything. I'll pay for all of Ellie's treatment. I'll give her everything in the divorce. Just tell me what you want." Divorce. Interesting. Richard was already planning his exit strategy, thinking he could buy his way out of his responsibilities with a financial settlement. But some things can't be bought or negotiated away. At exactly 10:00 p.m., I called him back. "Clara, thank God you called. Look, I've been thinking about everything you said, and you're absolutely right. I've handled this situation terribly, but I can fix it. I can make amends. The hour's up, Richard." "What? What does that mean? What's going to happen?" I looked around the quiet hospital corridor, at the quiet efficiency of the night shift nurses, at the families keeping vigil over their loved ones, at the simple, basic human decency of people caring for each other in a crisis. Nothing is going to happen, Richard. That was the point. I don't understand. For the last hour, you have experienced a small fraction of what your wife has been feeling for the last 6 weeks. Uncertainty, fear, the feeling of being abandoned by someone who should be there for you. The difference is, your hour of anxiety is over. Hers isn't. There was dead silence on the other end of the line. You want to know what's going to happen to you? You're going to live with the knowledge that when your wife needed you most, you abandoned her to go to a party. You're going to remember that while she was fighting for her life, you were celebrating your freedom. And every single person at that party tonight is going to remember it too. Clara, please. I'm hanging up now. Don't call me again. Don't come to this hospital. Don't contact Eleanor unless she specifically asks for you. And Richard, I added, my voice dropping to an icy calm, if I ever hear that you are using her illness as an excuse for anything, if you are telling people that you are grieving or struggling or any other lie to cover for your own selfishness, I will make sure that everyone you know hears the pause. True story of your birthday party. I ended the call and turned off my phone again. Through the large hospital window, I could see the lights of Chicago stretching out to the horizon. Somewhere in that vast, glittering maze of buildings, Richard was probably sitting alone, finally beginning to understand that his actions had consequences. But here, in this sterile corridor outside my daughter's room, Justice felt less like satisfaction and more like a profound exhaustion. The real work, helping Eleanor fight this terrible disease, was only just beginning. The neon glow of downtown Chicago painted the sidewalks in shifting, vibrant colors as I walked away from the Signature Lounge. The confrontation had left me with a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the explosive, satisfying release I might have imagined, but something quieter, steadier. It was the feeling of justice set in motion, of consequences finally aligning with actions. My phone read 9:05 p.m. Hospital visiting hours for family were extended until 10:00 p.m., which gave me just enough time for one crucial stop. Eleanor would need proper nutrition to have any chance of fighting this, and the hospital cafeteria food simply wouldn't do. There was a Whole Foods near the medical district that stayed open late, a haven for hospital staff and worried families like me. Inside, the bright fluorescent lights felt harsh and sterile after the dim, upscale ambiance of the rooftop bar, but it was an honest light. There was no pretense here, no performance, just people buying what they needed to take care of one another. I selected each item with care. Organic berries that wouldn't upset her sensitive stomach, fresh ginger for the nausea, and the specific brand of Greek yogurt she had loved as a child. Simple things, small comforts that might remind her body how to be healthy again. Shopping for someone who's recovering? The cashier asked as she scanned my items. She was young, maybe 25, with kind, perceptive eyes that told me she'd seen her share of worried families. My daughter. She's undergoing cancer treatment. I'm so sorry. Is she doing better? She's getting there, I said, and the words felt true as I uttered them. Eleanor was getting better, not just medically, but in ways that were far more important. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't carrying the burden of protecting everyone from her truth. These are good choices, the cashier said, holding up the ginger. My aunt swore by fresh ginger tea during her chemo. The receipt showed 9:23 p.m., just enough time to get back to the hospital before visiting hours ended. In the taxi on the way back to Northwestern, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Package delivery scheduled for 10:15 p.m. Address confirmed. It was from Agent Morales, my late husband Michael's former partner at the FBI, who now headed the Financial Crimes Unit. She had been more than willing to assist when I explained Richard's situation, especially after seeing the evidence David had uncovered about offshore accounts and potential tax evasion. The hospital lobby felt different at night. It was quieter, more intimate. Small clusters of families were gathered in the waiting areas, some dozing in uncomfortable chairs, others keeping a quiet vigil with lukewarm coffee and whispered conversations. These were people who understood that love meant showing up, especially when life became difficult. Room 314 was softly lit by the evening light. Eleanor looked better than she had this morning. The medical procedures had clearly helped, and a little bit of color had returned to her cheeks. She was awake, reading something on a tablet, looking almost like her old self again. "You brought groceries?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips as she looked at the bag in my hands. "Mom, the hospital feeds me. You don't need to do this. Hospital food isn't going to give you the strength to fight this thing," I said, unpacking the items and arranging them on her bedside table like a small offering to her recovery. "Besides, I remembered how much you loved this yogurt when you were little. The Greek Gods brand. I haven't had this in years," she said, her voice filled with genuine pleasure. "Sometimes the old things are the best things." She studied my face with that sharp, perceptive gaze she had inherited from her father. "You seem different tonight. Calmer, less frantic." "I had some business to take care of." "It went well." "What kind of business?" My phone vibrated again. Another text. "Target acquired. Timeline confirmed. Proceeding as planned." "Nothing you need to worry about," I said, silencing the phone. "Just some loose ends that needed tying up." But Eleanor was not fooled. She had always been able to read me with an unnerving accuracy, even when she was a child. "Mom, what did you do about Richard? What makes you think I did anything?" "Because you're you. Because when someone hurts our family, you fix it. Because you disappeared for 3 hours this evening and came back looking like justice has been served. She was a smart girl. Sometimes, too smart for her own good. I had a conversation with your husband. He won't be bothering you anymore. What kind of conversation? The kind where he learned that actions have consequences. The kind where he discovered that abandoning his wife comes with a very steep price. She was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Outside her window, the city of Chicago continued its endless, vibrant pulse of life and ambition. Somewhere in that sprawling maze of lights, Richard was probably trying to call me again, still failing to understand that his hour of reckoning had only just begun. I should probably be upset that you confronted him, Eleanor said finally. But I'm not. I'm just so tired of protecting people who don't protect me back. You don't have to protect anyone anymore, sweetheart. That's my job now. My phone buzzed a third time. I glanced at it quickly. Warrant executed. Evidence secured. Full report to follow. Excellent. Agent Morales was as thorough as ever. She had waited until she had everything she needed before making her move. Richard's evening was about to get significantly worse than just a ruined party. Mom? Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. Are you going to tell me what's really going on with that phone? Before I could formulate an answer, the device rang in my hands. Richard's name flashed on the screen. In the background, I could hear raised voices, official-sounding commands, the unmistakable sounds of a law enforcement operation in progress. I looked at my daughter, lying in her hospital bed, finally safe from the man who should have been her protector. Then, I answered the call. Clara, please, you have to help me. Richard's voice was shrill, cracking with a panic that was palpable in every syllable. Behind him, I could hear the sharp commands of official voices, the sound of doors being opened, and the heavy tread of footsteps on hardwood floors. I'm sorry, Richard. I can't hear you very well, I said calmly, putting the phone on speaker so Eleanor could listen. There seems to be some kind of commotion in the background. It's the FBI. They're in my apartment right now. They're going through everything. They have a search warrant. Clara, what did you do? I didn't do anything, Richard, but I suspect they might be interested in your financial arrangements. Something about tax evasion, perhaps? Offshore accounts? There was dead silence on his end, punctuated only by the sounds of a systematic search in progress. I could almost picture his face, the color draining away as he began to grasp the full scope of what was happening. How do you know about? He cut himself off, but it was too late. About the accounts in the Cayman Islands? The ones where you've been hiding money for the last 3 years? The same money that could have paid for your wife's medical treatments? My voice remained even, conversational. Or did you mean the consulting fees you conveniently forgot to report? The ones that pushed your little tax problem into felony territory? Agent Morales's voice came through the phone, crisp and clear. Mr. Sterling, you need to step away from the safe and keep your hands where I can see them. Clara, please, he begged. I know we have our differences, but I'm family. You can't just… Family? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Family means being there when someone needs you. Family means holding their hand during chemotherapy, not celebrating your freedom while they fight for their life. Eleanor was watching me with wide eyes, a look of dawning comprehension on her face. It wasn't shock. It was something closer to awe. I can explain everything, Richard continued, his voice thick with desperation. The money, the accounts, all of it. I was planning to use it for Ellie's treatment, I swear. I just needed to… You needed to what? Throw yourself a birthday party first? Bring other women to her apartment while she was in the hospital? Another voice in the background, professional and calm. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. You have the right to remain silent. Clara, don't let them do this to me. I'm your daughter's husband. Think about what this will do to her reputation, her standing in the community. I looked at my daughter, lying in her hospital bed, thin and pale but with a fire rekindling in her eyes. She had been protecting this man's reputation while he was spending her medical fund on champagne and parties. My daughter's standing in the community will be just fine, I said. She's a cancer survivor who was abandoned by her husband. People tend to sympathize with that kind of strength. You, on the other hand, are a man who hid assets while his wife was facing a terminal illness. How do you think that's going to play in the newspapers? The newspapers? You can't be serious. Financial crimes involving federal tax evasion? A high-powered executive caught hiding millions while his wife battled cancer? Richard, this is exactly the kind of story the press adores. The sounds of official activity continued in the background. I could hear the rustle of evidence bags being sealed, digital devices being collected, the methodical process of building a case that would utterly destroy Richard's career and his freedom. Agent Morales is very thorough, I continued conversationally. She worked with my late husband for years. She learned a lot from him about following financial trails and building airtight cases. She was particularly interested when I mentioned your situation. Your father-in-law worked for the FBI for 23 years, in the financial crimes unit. He had a lot of friends who were very concerned when they heard about how you were treating his daughter. The full, devastating realization was finally hitting him. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. This was a team of professional law enforcement officers who took white-collar crime very seriously, especially when it involved the abandonment of a sick family member. Clara, I'm begging you. Call them off. I'll pay for everything. All of Ellie's treatment, experimental therapies, whatever she needs. I'll liquidate the offshore accounts. I'll pay all the back taxes. Just make this stop. That's an interesting offer, Richard. Unfortunately, once the FBI has evidence of federal crimes, private citizens like me can't really call them off. That's not how our justice system works. Agent Morales' voice came on the line again. Mr. Sterling, we're ready to transport you downtown for processing. Processing? What does that mean? It means you're going to jail, Richard. Tonight. While your wife is in a cancer ward, you'll be in a holding cell. I find that to be appropriately symbolic. This is insane. You can't destroy my life just because you don't like how I handled my marriage. I didn't destroy your life, I said quietly. You destroyed your own life the moment you chose to celebrate your wife's illness instead of supporting her through it. I just made sure there were consequences. The line went quiet, except for the sounds of footsteps and official voices. Then, Agent Morales came on the line. Mrs. Wallace, this is Agent Morales. Mr. Sterling has been taken into custody. The evidence collection is complete. We found more than enough to proceed with federal charges. Thank you, Agent Morales. I appreciate your thoroughness. Your husband trained me well. He would have been proud to see justice served for his daughter. I hung up the phone and looked at Eleanor. She was sitting up in bed now, looking more alert and alive than I had seen her all day. Mom, was that real? Did you really just have Richard arrested by the FBI? I provided information about potential financial crimes to the appropriate authorities. They made their own decisions about how to proceed. But how did you know about the offshore accounts? David Chen is very good at his job. And your father's former colleagues were highly motivated to help when they understood the situation. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had just happened. Then, unexpectedly, she started to laugh. It wasn't the bitter, hollow laugh of someone who had been betrayed, but a sound of genuine, cathartic amusement at the sheer, elegant justice of it all. He called you for help, she said, between bursts of laughter. The man who abandoned me called my mother for help when the consequences finally caught up to him. Some people never learn that actions have consequences, I said, but they usually figure it out eventually. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the large windows of Eleanor's new apartment in Lincoln Park, illuminating the canvases propped against the walls and the art supplies scattered across a large work table. She moved around the kitchen with an energy I hadn't seen since long before her diagnosis, preparing lunch with the focused joy of someone who had learned not to take life's simple pleasures for granted. The oncologist says my latest scans are completely clear, she called over her shoulder as she sliced vegetables. 6 months, without a single trace of any cancer cells. That's wonderful news, sweetheart, I said, sitting at her kitchen table, just watching my daughter inhabit her life again. Truly inhabit it, not just survive it. Dr. Evans must be thrilled. She says I'm one of her miracle cases. The experimental treatment protocol worked better than anyone could have hoped. Ellie paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. Of course, Having all the financial stress removed probably helped my immune system focus on fighting cancer instead of fighting anxiety. Richard's asset forfeiture had covered all of her medical expenses, with plenty left over. The federal courts had moved swiftly to seize his hidden accounts, and victim restitution had been their top priority. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came with very practical benefits. "Have you heard anything about his appeal?" I asked. "His lawyer called last month. Richard wants to try to reduce his sentence by cooperating with other financial crime investigations. Apparently, he knows where a lot of bodies are buried on Wall Street." She resumed chopping, her movements precise and confident. "I told the prosecutor that I had no opinion on whether he deserved any consideration." "And how do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I don't really think about him much anymore. When someone shows you exactly who they are during the worst crisis of your life, you stop wasting energy wondering what might have been." This version of Eleanor was stronger than the one I had found in that hospital bed 6 months ago. Not just physically, but in the ways that truly mattered. She had learned that she could survive betrayal, illness, and profound uncertainty. That knowledge had made her fearless. "Agent Morales stopped by last week," she continued. "She wanted to see how I was doing, and she told me about some financial literacy workshops the FBI runs for victims of fraud. She thinks I might be good at helping other people who've been exploited by family members. Would you be interested in something like that?" "Maybe. There's something appealing about the idea of turning a terrible experience into something that helps others." She brought 2 plates to the table and sat down across from me. "Speaking of Agent Morales, she told me something interesting about Dad." "Oh?" She said Dad always used to talk about how proud he was that his wife understood that justice wasn't the same thing as revenge. That you always looked for solutions that fixed the problem, rather than just punishing the person. I thought about that night in the hospital, listening to Richard's world collapse around him. There had been a certain satisfaction in that moment, but it wasn't the bitter, fleeting satisfaction that comes from personal vengeance. It was the satisfaction of watching a system work correctly, law enforcement catching a criminal, consequences aligning with actions, and protection being provided for the vulnerable. "Your father was the one who taught me that distinction," I said. "He used to say that revenge makes you feel better for a moment, but justice makes the world better permanently." "Did you ever want revenge? Just pure personal revenge?" In the taxi on the way to the Signature Lounge, yes. I wanted to humiliate him, to make him suffer the way you had suffered. But by the time I got there, I realized that wouldn't actually help you or change anything fundamental. "So you chose the harder path." "I chose the path that solved the problem. Richard wasn't just abandoning you. He was committing federal crimes. He would have likely done both of those things again to someone else. Getting him arrested protected you, and it protected his future victims." Eleanor nodded, a look of understanding in her eyes. "And it made sure his hidden money went to my medical care instead of his entertainment." "That," I said with a small smile, "was a bonus, not the primary goal." We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of easy quiet that comes from deep familiarity and mutual respect. Through her window, I could see her neighbors going about their afternoon routines, walking their dogs and carrying groceries, living normal lives that weren't defined by crisis or betrayal. "I've been thinking about dating again," Eleanor said suddenly. "How do you feel about that?" I asked. Nervous, but a good kind of nervous. Like I'm finally ready to trust my own judgment about people again. She smiled. "And having a mother who is willing to coordinate with federal law enforcement makes me feel pretty confident about my safety. I am officially retired from the coordinating business. Once was enough." "Are you sure about that?" Her tone was teasing, affectionate. "Just promise me you'll do the background checks quietly if I ever bring someone home to meet you." "I will make no such promises." She laughed, and the sound was pure, unadulterated joy. It wasn't the careful, measured laughter of someone trying to manage other people's comfort, but the genuine amusement of a woman who felt safe enough to be completely and utterly herself. Later, as I prepared to catch the train back to the suburbs, I looked around her apartment one last time. Art projects in various stages of completion. Medical appointment reminders on the fridge that spoke of routine checkups, not crisis management. Photographs of friends and family who had rallied around her during her recovery. "This is a good life you're building here," I told her. "It's my life," she said simply. "For the first time in years, it feels like it's actually mine." Standing at her door, my overnight bag in hand, I realized that this was what justice truly looked like. Not a dramatic courtroom showdown or a satisfying moment of revenge, but a woman making lunch in her own kitchen, planning her future, considering new relationships, and living her life without fear or financial anxiety. "I'll see you next week," I said. "Drive safely, Mom. And thank you." "For what?" "For showing me what family really means. For proving that some people can be trusted to do the right thing, even when it's complicated." Walking towards the subway station in the late afternoon light, I thought about Michael, and how proud he would be of our daughter's incredible strength, and of the way justice had, in the end, prevailed. Not through anger or a personal vendetta, but through patience, careful planning, and an unwavering faith that systems can and do work when they are operated by people who care about doing the right thing. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Eleanor. "Forgot to tell you, I'm thinking about getting a dog. Just so you know, for the next time you need to coordinate with law enforcement, some things, thankfully, never change."